Hey everybody, Andy from Tennis Euphoria, bringing you a review of the Babolat Pure Drive 98 2025. This video will focus on the 98. If you want some ideas and a review about the 300 gram 100 square inches, then please see the channel for a full review of that frame. So the previous edition of this frame and the VS that preceded that, we didn't review very favourably. I didn't really get its place or its identity. After all, if you're looking for an all-out power frame, which the Pure Drive is all about, then I felt that you would go for the Pure Drive over the previous edition. And if you were looking for a 98 square inch that blended power and control, then I felt that there were other options on the market that were perhaps better. And that was certainly seconded by a lot of our assessment processes. When people were matched to this category, we didn't have anybody pick their previous Pure Drive 98 last year. So there is stiff competition and the need for Babolat to really home in on what this racket is all about, in my opinion. Some of the competition you can see here. I guess the market leader arguably is the E-Zone 98 that does blend power and control very well. But then of course within Babolat's own offerings you have the Aero 98 and the Strike 98 that are two 98s that offer good power and good control depending on your swing style and your technique. So some things carry over from the previous edition. It's a 98 square inch still, it's 305 grams unstrung. Mine was a little overweight and a hefty 334 swing weight, but there are some big changes to this update which I think helps to further give this frame some identity and a focus group. Those changes are in the beam. We now have much more of a box beam construction. It's particularly noticeable above 3 and 9. And if you compare it to the Aero 98, which I guess a lot of people will still consider against this frame, then it does have that different construction. We now have a shared 16 by 20 pattern, just like the Aero 98, which is particularly good on the Aero 98, so that's a good sign. All of the new Pure Drives have the new NF2 tech. So I think there are a number of positives about this frame. There's a lot of risks and a few negatives too. And there is more of a clear target group for this racket in my opinion. So I'll try to run through those, starting with some of the positives. So the first positive to note is feel. The NF2 works particularly well at improving the feel in my opinion. Now that of course is a bit subjective. A lot of feel depends on what you like, but this at a Babolat reported 73 RA is a particularly stiff frame, but I feel that the NF2 does soften that feel a little bit. You kind of feel like you're still playing with a very, very stiff frame, but I certainly felt a bit more connected and I would have guessed at a slightly lower RA. The other thing that is, I think, an improvement and a positive is I think that this frame is likely to be more comfortable than the previous two iterations, probably largely down to that NF2. And I think overall, Babolat are now very good at filtering out harsh vibrations. They probably are very aware of that unwanted reputation that they've got around arm bad health. And I think that this is less likely to damage your arm compared to the previous iterations. The third positive is that I felt that this edition hits a much more consistent ball compared to the previous and does offer better control. So I think that extra string, the 16 by 20 pattern, and combined with that box beam does give you more control and a more consistent response from the string bed overall. So I think the broad picture here is that Babolat have consciously moved this frame as much as they can towards the control orientated player who's looking for power from their control orientated stick. And generally speaking, I think they've done a really good job at making that a distinct move and making some improvements on the previous frame. But here's some of the risks and the potential negatives. Whilst it is more comfortable, it is still a very stiff frame and you can really feel that you're playing with a stiff frame. I would say that over the 2 weeks I've pushed my elbow as far as it would like to go, and I would certainly be very mindful of what string I would be using in this and what tension I would be using. I noted that when you buy your frame, the advice on the package is to go for a hybrid string setup. And I think that is something that would be quite wise in this, as I think it would potentially be risky for people who have any concerns around their arm. The second thing to note is launch angle. Now this has a relatively low launch angle, and certainly for me, I appreciate an immediate, fairly high launch and something that will cut a ball up and down. I don't play with bags of spin, but I appreciate that insurance over the net. And I also appreciate that as a smaller player on my second serve. And for me, the racket wasn't well matched in both of those senses. It wasn't giving me a much kick on my second serve, and it wasn't giving me the lift over the net that I would like. So if you're somebody who likes a bit of lift, likes something that generates a lot of spin and a lot of kick, then I don't think you're going to get it from this frame. The other thing to note is I think where you connect with the ball or the string bed with the ball is very important as to whether you'll enjoy this frame or not. Now, quite surprisingly, despite the 334 swing weight, I actually found the racket to be a little bit unstable towards the top of the frame. And I think that might have something to do with the new box beam construction and the balance point as well. I think a lot of the weight is centered towards the throat and going up through to 3 and 9. Now that has risks in terms of a little bit of instability, and you kind of feel like you're hitting off center a little if you're connecting at the top. If you connect at the middle or sort of lower center of the string bed each time, then you get on probably quite well with quite a solid and stable response. But as we know from testing people here and taking lots of video assessments of people's technique and where they strike the ball, people actually vary quite a lot as to where they will typically hit on the string bed and make their connection point. So this frame will be optimized towards people who are connecting towards the middle or lower part of the racket head on each of their shots. Now conversely, that also means that if you're someone who's connecting towards the top, then you would be much better off with a frame that is engineered to be hit at that end. So Nordic dots springs to mind. Also, of course, Yonex isometric frames, head brooms, etc. You're going to get a much more natural response, more lift and more spin from those frames, and you're going to be hitting the engineered sweet spot more commonly if you hit in that way. I think the other risk/reward thing to keep in mind is that it is quite a lot to swing. At 334 swing weight, that is designed to appeal to the advanced player, and that is the case. It's not something that's easy to swing, and you might tire if you're not fit and not advanced. And also, this is not a forgiving racket in any way. It shouldn't be considered alongside its brother, the 100 square inch 300 gram, which is much more forgiving and much more easy to use. I would say the volleying was decent, again, if you're connecting in that appropriate sweet spot. And of course, if you can get that racket up and through the air and pronating down through your first serve, then you can hit a decent first serve. So for the advanced player who's hitting quite flat, I think they will actually hit with this quite well. So who is that intended category for? Well, for me, it's much clearer in as much as if you are a relatively flat hitting, aggressive advanced player who likes to drive through the ball rather than hitting with lots of spin, then I think you're going to get on quite well with this frame. I'm thinking people who are perhaps playing with pro staffs, maybe prestige and blade users, but people who are maybe looking for a little bit of extra power. You've of course got to be quite fit and not have arm issues to deal with it. But I think the biggest problem will probably be some of the issues that the previous faced. So whilst this is an improvement, I think it might be hard to look past some of its competitors. So in hitting, if you hit this directly next to the Aero 98, you immediately notice the difference in the feel, the comfort, but also the launch angle. And I think I'll find through assessments when people book on that the numbers are just fundamentally much better around consistency and effectiveness when they hit with the Aero 98 compared to this Drive 98. And I also think it goes back to that competition. So it does have good power, but could you lead up that FX 500 Tour and have the same power? Yes, you could. Does the EZO 98 offer you the same power and less risk around your arm and better feel? Yes, you probably could. And also the Strike 98, I think actually is more forgiving still than the Drive 98, so players might want to go there. And then of course we have that new player on the block, that Gravity Tour 98. So I think whilst it's an improvement, it might still struggle with the competition, but it's well worth a demo this time around. Hope that helps. See you in the next one.